This is Adam reporting, Senior Officer, Signals Intelligence, Defense and Security Department, CSIS. Reporting on Segment 2 of the Subspeed of Light Wave Facility Mass Casualty Events. Preliminary findings. Officially recorded to have begun on December 10, 1954, a top-secret Japanese research and development facility near the Coral Sea on Island experienced the first in a series of mass casualty events. Following the delivery of the previous segment, CSIS Data Forensics Services Division members were tasked to analyze data previously believed too damaged or corrupted when it was initially intercepted by our listening post. Technicians were brought on board, and their work has yielded success in the form of newly repaired logs and even some photographs. This has led to the development of a stronger working theory on the source and nature of the hostile forces that invaded the Subspeed of Light Wave facility, as well as the fate of the first recovery expedition deployed in 1955. Following the onset of the first mass casualty incident, officially recorded as December 10, 1954, leadership of the Subspeed of Light Wave facility have just become aware of the loss of communications with their facility. They are unaware of the full scope of the mass casualty event currently unfolding, but a decision is made to covertly deploy a team of 25 soldiers to their clandestine facility to ascertain precisely what had occurred, rescue whomever could be rescued, and evacuate the facility. While this was unfolding back on the mainland, critical events had and were still occurring within the Subspeed of Light Wave facility. The window of time in which facility staff had disabled the Subspeed of Light Wave system's overdrive block was intended to allow them to successfully receive and decrypt the signals being sent to Earth from Alpha Centauri. In Segment 1, it is mentioned that a signal was received on October 30, 1954, but it was our belief, based on the evaluation of logs newly recovered, that the cause of failure was due to a lack of computing power and capacity. We believe that the frustration the staff would have felt after coming so close to decrypting the message could have driven them to demanding newer hardware and would have also made disabling the system overdrive block seem more appealing. This transcript of an unsubmitted draft of a letter dated 8 days prior to the mass casualty incident sheds some light on this.
December 2, 1954. The purpose of this letter is to submit a request for a hardware upgrade of the analysis, simulation, and internal communication systems. The amount of data has increased exponentially in comparison to what we were used to managing initially. The hardware in our possession is still functional, but the processing speed has decreased significantly. Below is a list of components necessary to normalize workflows and cover requirements for at least 24 months. 16 RAM sticks, 4 megabytes each. 16 processors, minimum 60 MHz, preferably 75 MHz. 16 hard drives, 500 megabytes, preferably 896 megabytes. Hiroki Suwa, IG Manager.
We observed that the Kira OS system startup indicated that they were working with 20 megahertz processors and just over 2 megabytes of RAM in each computer terminal. For the 1950s, this hardware was a step above cutting edge, and these Kira OS terminals would have been considered supercomputers had they been public knowledge. The rest of the world was still publicly working with computers utilizing vacuum tube technology at the time. The calculations and programs that the Subspeed of Light Wave facility were running already required hardware 10 times more capable than NASA would require to put the first people onto the moon. The Apollo mission guidance computer, built over 10 years later in the 1960s, had just over 2 megahertz and just over 2 megabytes of RAM. Given the staff were likely aware they were using some of the best hardware available, it must have been quite a shock to learn it still wasn't enough for the task at hand. The staff in this facility would have been under intense pressure to produce results given the vast amount of resources invested to keep the facility running and kept secret. By removing the overdrive block, the Subspeed of Light Wave system hardware was effectively being overclocked and running hotter and faster than intended. Normally, this would reduce the effective lifespan of whatever sort of CPU or GPU was being overclocked, on top of requiring far more power than the device normally would, which are valid reasons most folks do not do this. We can see that the overdrive block was scheduled to end at 8:00 a.m. on December 11, 1954. Not even one day after contact with the facility was lost. This gave a window of 48 hours in which they were anticipating their next chance to receive and decrypt what they must have thought would be an alien communication of some sort. The facility ended up receiving something entirely different than what they were expecting, however. The manifestation of an intangible, hostile alien consciousness was definitely more than facility staff had or could have planned for. All facility operations across the entire island were disrupted and chaos ensued as staff were unprepared to respond to an invasion on this scale stemming from within their own facility. As staff were trapped on the island until theoretical rescuers arrived, some of them chose to leverage their expertise and attempt to put their skills to use in a hopeless situation. This is a transcript of notes someone was keeping during the incident.
December 15, 1954. Something alive has returned. It wasn't just an answering signal. Something traveled more than 4 light years and reached us. Something we're unable to understand. An entity infinitely superior to humanity and all scientific progress that we have made over millennia. And now, it's studying us and trying to replicate us. Those gigantic arachnids. And God, that hand, they look like confused experiments. One attempt after another to reconstruct the biological organisms present on the island. Insects, animals, and humans.
Based on this log, we are going to refer to whatever it is that traveled to the facility through the subspeed of light wave machine as the entity going forward. This transcripted recording shares another discovery made by a researcher during the incident.
This is Hikari Research and Development Section. It is December 13, 1954, 23:51. I'm hiding on one of the locomotives and think I'm safe. This afternoon, I plucked up my courage and managed to place a modified wave detector in the center of the interchange room. What is recording is amazing. All signals come from a single source. They seem to enter bodies, analyze them, then exit them, and return to the point of origin, carrying an enormous amount of information on the biological structure of the analyzed subjects, as if something was gathering random information about the living organisms present in the structure. But for what purpose? I have to find the point of origin.
This information would be of little use to those currently in the facility at that time, but it isn't out of the question that some of the facility staff had resigned themselves to their fates and wanted to leave logs like these for posterity. As these people were the experts and had no incentive to posthumously lie to us or even believe their messages would be found, we are treating these statements as credible accounts. That information from Hikari is crucial to explaining the nature of the opposing forces who would go on to confront anyone on the island going forward. The entity was singularly obsessed with analyzing the world around it and using this information to create aberrant clones of life forms it encountered. We here at CSIS cannot be certain why with the information on hand, but the entity appeared to have been immediately hostile toward the facility staff around it. It appears that information is currently out of our reach, but we will continue to evaluate whether or not the entity was always hostile toward humanity. In 1976, the facility leadership were extracting the maximum value out of their UAV footage of failed recovery attempts from volunteers. They were actively researching and cataloging the different types of clones and other creations of the entity captured by now deceased volunteers. Anyone entering the facility between 1955 and the summer of 1976 could expect to be attacked and mobbed by facsimiles of the previous staff.
Mutated Scientists. Probably among the first abominations to appear in the facility. These beings are clearly copies of the staff that worked on the island in the 50s. They are recognizable by the remains of the white lab coats they still wear, a distant, blood-distorted memory of the years of activity of the facility. Average height 1.7 meters, 5.7 feet. Average weight 62 kilograms, 136 pounds.
With about average metrics and profile for a human adult, out of the corner of your eye, this might actually be passable as a normal human being for a moment and not raise your alarm. If hostile copies of the researchers that the 1955 rescue expedition was sent to protect wasn't confusing enough for them, then they had this to contend with.
Armed Soulless. Probably recreated based on the old security guards of the facility, or even the soldiers of the first expedition of the 50s. These beings are armed with automatic rifles and shotguns. It is surprising the fidelity in replicating human behaviors of aiming and firing, lethal at medium and short distances. Their step is heavy but slow, making them more vulnerable if attacked from long distances. Average height 1.82 meters, 6 feet. Average weight 75 kilograms, 165 pounds.
We believe that the entity's capacity to so rapidly assimilate and approximate ranged weaponry successfully is the reason volunteers of the 1976 expedition were provided with outdated and sometimes ineffective weaponry. Being attacked and fired on by uncanny valley approximations of the security forces that you had assumed were your human allies is not something a sane person would know to anticipate. Just a moment's hesitation would have been all that the hostile copies of facility security guards would need to draw their weapons and fire on the rescue expedition before they understood the danger that they were in. The entity definitely wasn't content to end its study and experimentation on Earth with just cloning humans, though. Despite accounts from facility staff showing that the island had an eerie lack of life in general, humans had brought other, more invasive life forms with them in transit, as we tend to do.
Spider. In its chaotic process of studying and cloning the living beings encountered on the island, the entity made no distinction between humans and other biological organisms, mixing species haphazardly with atrocious results contrary to any evolutionary logic. These spiders of indescribable dimensions have bony and pointed legs similar to the fleshless limbs of large animals. Average height 90 centimeters, 3 feet. Average weight 45 kilograms, 99 pounds.
3 feet in height meant that these were the same size as the average Great Dane, and they demonstrated a tendency to hunt in packs. The fog that began to cover the facility after December 10, 1954 appears to represent the boundary of where the entity can exert its influence. Given that the limits of the effective cloning radius of the entity were of the utmost concern to the facility leadership, we performed our own investigation, and our findings were disturbing. The copies the entity produced and any weapons cloned were initially limited to people and things found on the island. Every time new weaponry or special operatives entered the facility, they gave the entity another template to clone and inadvertently contributed to the threat it posed. This issue was already exacerbated by the fact researchers had managed to develop laser technology and weaponry within the facility itself, along with their other experimental weaponry and devices. We investigated what the fog might be composed of, given its phenomenal capabilities. When the subspeed of light wave system was online and under control, evidence shows that the air was already contaminated and had negative effects on the growth of plants in the facility. This Kira OS entry from a terminal located in the East Wing, Building C, starts to explain that.
22/08/1953. Notes of 1.txt. The cultivation of edible vegetables is going quite well, despite the initially difficult conditions of the atmosphere in the facility. The filters installed at Dr. Kanawai's request have dramatically reduced the growth times of all plant species.
Our theorized cause of the pre-incident atmospheric contamination is that the subspeed of light wave facility cosmonaut program was the cause and source of the air issues. In segment 1, we reviewed evidence showing us that the facility staff were sending their cosmonauts to what we believe is a planetary body in Alpha Centauri, using the subspeed of light wave technology in an undisclosed way. As the subspeed of lightwave machine was able to receive the entity itself, we believe this serves as proof to show that the machine was capable of transmitting and receiving both people and things in the same fashion. The previous log confirms that airborne contamination was already a persistent issue throughout the facility back in 1953. This precedes the mass casualty incident by nearly 2 years. Using the subspeed of lightwave machine to transmit cosmonauts to Alpha Centauri was causing a large degree of atmospheric exchange between the facility and their destination. With the cosmonaut program activities leading to persistent airborne contamination, it makes sense they would need to install air filters in the agricultural labs in order to give their plants a chance to grow properly. Once the entity entered the facility, the levels of airborne contamination increased from an inconvenience to a genuine threat. We noted 2 logs where people remarked on the air smelling noticeably sweeter, signaling a marked increase of the amount of foreign particulates in the air if naked human senses alone could detect it. The airborne contaminants accumulated to such an extent that they became perceptible to us as a fog enveloping the island, and once the facility was recovered and the entity neutralized in 1976, the fog was no longer present. We believe this correlation serves as a valid cause to believe the entity was passively creating or generating the fog. We are further asserting in this preliminary report that the fog serves as an extension of the entity's body to whatever extent it can be understood to have one. To begin to support what we here in CSIS are referring to as entity body theory, we have this follow-up to an earlier recording.
This is Hikari Ueda, Research and Development Section. It is 2002, December 16, 1954. I put the modified wave detector into a backpack. It's heavy, but I'm still able to move fast enough. I am following the signal backwards to find its origin, and I have arrived at the subspeed of lightwave center. The signal starts from here, disperses to the other buildings, and then it is here that it returns after having collected the data of the biological structures it has encountered. The subspeed of lightwave room is closed, but that's where the waves go. Something is studying us, and it's using the system to travel to Earth, study us, and then send the data back to the source, I'm sure.
Unfortunately, based on what we came to see later on with the recovery expedition sent in 1976, the subspeed of lightwave center was ground zero for the mass casualty event, and by far the most dangerous place on the island. This bears mentioning because the next email came from a different person who signed off with Y. Suzuki, trying to reach a security group inbox on December 31st of 1954, 2 weeks after the last log, which leaves Hikari's status undetermined.
The source is in the subspeed of lightwave center. Send security. The mind is in the room.
There's evidence showing the entity was trying to build itself a body to inhabit, and we believe it was on track to develop a colossal approximation of a human body. While it seems like the entity was, in our human understanding, some sort of metaphysical being or construct, it could only seem to exist within the fog it was surrounded with. The idea of an alien species circumventing the need to physically travel through space by instead transmitting their consciousness to the destination and building a new body is intriguing. We theorize the entity's ultimate goal in attempting to build itself this body was that this would have allowed it to extend its reach even further. Here in CSIS, given the entity's tendency to commit mass slaughter of all human life it encounters, we believe the entity's reach on Earth should be non-existent. This entry on another creation of the entity further supports the assertion that these and the fog were serving as parts of a much larger and complex construct.
Spore. An elementary unicellular organism, the spore, as it is called, appears to be the beginning of a more complex organic product abandoned at the embryonic stage but grown enormously. Although they do not intrinsically constitute a threat, they tend to explode and release a gas whose composition can rapidly attack the nervous system of those who inhale it, causing partial paralysis for a few seconds. Average diameter 50 centimeters, 20 inches. Average weight 18 kilograms, 39 pounds.
The environment of giant human organs existing alongside hostile and xenophobic cells the size of a small TV screen and weighing 39 pounds has led us to conclude that these cells are functioning similarly to human antibodies. When the information on these spore cells is viewed in combination with everything else detailed in this segment, it allows us to understand why only one known expedition was sent in as a group. If the entity was creating a massive facsimile of the human body with living gas bombs serving as pseudo-antibodies, that would explain the limit of only one person per expedition. Once someone entered the fog surrounding the subspeed of light wave facility, they triggered an immune response. This response would draw nearby cloned bodies and creatures towards the offending person, usually leading to a swift death. The amount of cloned humans and creatures that the volunteers had to dispatch in 1976 to make it through the facility was substantial, and the facility leadership, to their credit, were treating this immune response as the danger that it was. If the amount of clones and the aggressiveness of the response are in part based on how many people are triggering this immune response from the entity, it's no wonder why the 1955 recovery expedition of 25 people failed. We needed to understand why the entity would seemingly stop the construction of this massive body when it was clearly at an advantage. Currently, we think that the answer to this, and disturbingly, the real reason why the entity was unsuccessful in spreading outside the facility is less to do with human intervention. The entity's primary constraint was that it could only transmit itself and data between its source and the facility when the limited hardware they had was pushed to its limits. Otherwise, it would have traveled to the subspeed of light wave facility far sooner. Our conclusion is that the entity was effectively stranded in the facility once the subspeed of light wave system overdrive block was automatically re-enabled. As previously mentioned, while operating normally, their hardware was unable to receive the first signal from Alpha Centauri on October 30, 1954. Receiving this signal by satellite made this arrangement even more unstable. In a local area network, the latency or time it takes for the data to travel from sender to receiver hovers close to 0 milliseconds, in large part because the distance between sender and receiver is so small. In that same respect, larger amounts of data can be transferred in smaller amounts of time than a satellite transmission would. In the facility's case, their local area networks were capping out at 600 bytes per second back in 1954, meaning whatever their satellites were capable of would have been far lower of a transfer rate than their local area network. A satellite obviously does not have the luxury of proximity, and we can even see that in an effort to compensate, they had multiple ground station satellite dishes. But their latency on transmissions from Earth to Alpha Centauri was literally measured in years, nearly 5 years in their case. Referring back to Hikari Ueda's log, the entity's mind was scanning and uploading the information it obtained back to where it came from. We think the entity was receiving instructions and information from the source it was transmitting to. While we can't rule out that the entity was still able to transmit data back to the source once the subspeed of light wave system resumed normal operations, we do know it would have been subject to the extreme latency we just discussed. A consequence of this was the entity receiving incomplete instructions on whatever it had been intended to do, as it could no longer leave under those conditions and had to wait nearly 5 years for any communication it sent out to be received from December 1954 onward. It's quite possible that due to how advanced the entity and its source are, that they simply could not send messages to the subspeed of light wave facility again until either someone disabled the system overdrive block again, or someone otherwise overhauled the available hardware they were using. A further consequence, aside from being trapped on Earth, was that the entity seemed to be designed to continue repeating the instructions until further notice was received. Standard safety protocol and the end dating of the subspeed of light wave system's overdrive block, combined with the limitations of their hardware, have effectively prevented total disaster from occurring on the island. That is an entirely overly optimistic view of the situation, however. Not only was that information not known to anyone at the time, but it would have been of precious little comfort to the now deceased soldiers and volunteers sent into the facility. At some point between December 10 and December 24th of 1954, the Subspeed of Lightwave facility leadership have decided to send in a team of soldiers in order to conduct a rescue and recovery operation at the facility. December 24, 1954, a team of soldiers are briefed on their assigned mission objectives. They depart Japan by boat on what was intended to be a two-way trip. Unlike North America, Christians are a minority in Japan, so it's very likely not a single person on this expedition had an issue about leaving on Christmas Eve. This trip is best illustrated to us with the following record from Shohei Tazuki's personal diary.
Dated on the ship. A nice way to celebrate the new year. I can't wait to get off on dry land. The destination is a facility on an island in the middle of the Pacific. Apart from the ship's crew of 10 people, there are 25 passengers, including me. The strange thing is that no one has ever heard of the place, much less the island on which the facility resides. Some folks have relatively important connections, but apparently this place is unknown to anyone. I have to find an opportunity to speak to a member of the crew, but since the departure, each of them has seemed strangely evasive towards us.
Based on what we came to learn from future expeditions and Subspeed of Lightwave facility experiments, this level of operational security is standard procedure for them. The strict need-to-know minimalist approach of their recruiting process, which also extended to disclosure of operational objectives, is in line with how modern intelligence agencies operate. The support and backing of an intelligence agency from a global superpower who was willing to not only share nuclear secrets with Japan, but who also seemingly donated this very island in the region would explain a lot. That is all yet to be confirmed, but it is a very convenient way to fill in a lot of the gaps in how any of this managed to happen at all. Seeing as a mysterious benefactor would help a post-World War II Japan afford all of the costs associated with this facility and its recovery. It was also intriguing to learn that well-connected soldiers were not only considered for deployment in such a dangerous task, but that even those people were unaware of the Subspeed of Lightwave project. After what ended up happening to these soldiers, those important connections they mentioned must have been disappointed with their losses and reached out to express their displeasure with the outcome of this operation. Future expeditions were 100% filled by people deemed expendable, some of whom were picked off of the street, seeming to indicate there was a small degree of blowback for the facility leadership as a consequence of their poor decision-making. The next log of interest is a transcript of an old ledger showing us the inventory of equipment the rescue expedition brought along.
January 4, 1955. 120 Bengal, 60 floor lamps, 4 diesel generators, 25 first aid kits, 200 military rations, 5 firemen's axes, 30 gas masks, 30 flashlights with batteries, 30 spare batteries.
The Bengal lights would most likely be used as fireworks or in pyrotechnics today, but they used to be employed as signal flares. The inclusion of those at least helps us to explain why a loaded signal flare launcher would conveniently be found sitting on the shore of the island, ready to be fired by members of the expedition sent later in 1976. It seems like conditions on the island created by the fog were interfering with external radio wave communications, seeing as a decision was made to use these Bengal lights in what appear to be mortar bombard racks to signal completion of certain objectives. We know that the Subspeed of Lightwave facility was actively communicating with the mainland of Japan prior to the mass casualty event in 1954. It isn't as though these people forgot that radio transmitters exist, or that they wouldn't opt to choose a less cumbersome and inconvenient method of signaling back to the boat crew that didn't involve setting off explosives. We've chosen to infer from the absence of radio communications equipment that the fog clouds created by the entity were degrading or preventing those signals entirely. This is further supported by the facility falling silent on December 10, 1954. The lamps, generators, and firemen's axes could all plausibly be used in a variety of search and rescue scenarios. This loadout could easily be interpreted as being intended to leave the soldiers equipped to clear a pathway into an unpowered facility and provide aid to survivors. The amount of military rations issued would last their crew about 2.5 days if they ate 3 square meals a day. If they were being sent to a facility with the stated intent to search for and rescue potential survivors while also securing the premises, this food supply begins to seem lacking. We believe that the inventory issued was almost all security theater, so that the soldiers being deployed wouldn't grow concerned or suspicious until they were already on location. The gas masks being included was very noteworthy, with the previous information on the air contamination in the facility being known and documented. The Subspeed of Lightweight facility leadership was clearly aware of and anticipating the rescue expedition would encounter this, but chose not to disclose those facts. The facility leadership has a very poor track record with regards to their sense of ethics. When it comes to the later volunteers, we don't think that those people would have given the volunteers gas masks or air tanks unless it was deemed mandatory. This transcripted recording gives us a candid look at what the rescue expedition thought once their 12-day trip brought them to the Subspeed of Lightweight facility.
January 1955. This is Mishima, recovery expedition leader at the facility. We came back this morning after an 11-day journey. The destination is in the middle of the northern Pacific. Even at the command center, no one has had any idea of the existence of this place. Mission details are scarce. We've been tasked to investigate the reasons for the loss of communication with the facility, which occurred approximately 4 weeks ago, and recover personnel still on the island. This place is shrouded in darkness and in silence. A peculiar sweet smell permeates the air. All the details on the floor plans are confidential, so we don't really have an idea of the size of the facility. At a first glance of the outer walls, I'd say that our expedition of 25 people is undersized. We're setting up some lamps for...
A man can be heard calling in the distance, then the recording suddenly stops. Apparently, whatever interrupted this recording kept them busy until the following morning. It likely marked the beginning of an extended combat engagement, as the final known communication from those forces was on this letter from an unknown member of the expedition.
January 5, 1955. Dad, your premonitions were correct. They are hiding something from us. We were told it would be a recovery operation for some isolated researchers, but it's not true. Something happened in this place. We found bodies. There is blood everywhere. We were 25 in total, but this morning there was a firefight, and now there are only 8 of my fellow soldiers with me. We don't quite know what attacked us, but absurd as it might seem, many of us swear they've seen some sort of huge hand. A human hand, Dad, but as big as an elephant. Are we going crazy? The tension is high, and there's a strong smell in the air, almost sweet. Sometimes it's hard to breathe. If I don't come back, I hope this message reaches you. I want you to know that I love you, Dad. Takashi.
Hand. The horror of the entity's experiments often seems like a series of incomplete attempts, sometimes leading to results like the hand, a single limb, visibly human, but the size of an elephant. It's impossible to tell whether it has its own consciousness or just a series of violent instincts which makes it relentless once disturbed. Dragging itself on 4 fingers, it can reach speeds sufficient to make the escape of an adult human difficult. Average height 1.5 meters, 5 feet. Average weight 160 kilograms, 352 pounds.
For reference, adult elephants are about as wide as your average pickup truck. An elephant is nearly twice as tall as an average person, making this an inherently bad matchup for a human being. It's no wonder the subspeed of lightwave facility leadership chose to send in soldiers for that expedition. It would take an extremely disciplined fighter or a terminally brave individual to not cower away from that sort of engagement. And that's the last log we have from the rescue expedition. They all died in the facility. We also believe that the likelihood that this letter was passed on to their next of kin is zero, given it was found by and transcribed by later expedition volunteers in 1976. After failing to launch the signal flares, the rescue was officially recognized as a loss on January 6th of 1955. Those lost in the 1955 rescue expedition would end up being preserved in a fashion similar to the other casualties of the subspeed of lightwave facility, when the entity copied them as well. 2 decades after the loss of the 1955 rescue expedition, and the subspeed of lightwave facility was under surveillance the entire time. No further operations or expeditions we are aware of were conducted in Island until 1976, and when that time came about, things were handled entirely differently. A reconnaissance plane reported rooms lit within the subspeed of lightwave facility October 12, 1975. Prior to this, the strategy was to simply try and outweight the entity as the facility had lost power, and then go back one day and reclaim it. We can't be entirely certain of what caused the lights at the facility to power back on, although we suspect that it could be related to one specific entity within the facility. We can be certain, however, that facility leadership would want to make sure of the exact reason for why those lights went on, and that it wasn't another country discovering their secrets. Given that nuclear reactors today wouldn't be able to run for all of those years unattended, let alone having the fuel for that time span, the facility was running on backup power supplies like diesel generators or potentially some sort of hydroelectric energy source. The existence of backup power supplies and batteries serves to explain the existence of certain digital evidence and the facility being lit and powered beyond 1955. While reviewing Kira OS terminals, we came to learn that there were 2 systems that remained powered and active following December 10, 1954. First is the Doors network. Secure facilities need to have enhanced security procedures. The Doors network would achieve that. The many keypad-secured doors found across the facility with rotating passcodes would make sense to connect to and update from a central computer network. Now, the secondary network, which we note was never reactivated in the following expeditions, was the security network. We are under the impression that this network is one that is made for the facility's security staff. This would probably grant access to the closed-circuit security camera footage and the ability to grant, amend, or revoke access across the facility as needed. As per Kazue Okada's diary entry in Segment 1, the staffing policies were so restrictive that they weren't allowed into the subspeed of lightwave center without a constant security escort. We also noted that the closed-circuit security cameras all returned their last footage around the same time the security networks went offline between 1957 and 1958. The simplest way we can explain this is that these security cameras and security networks went offline gradually as the remaining power dwindled and non-essential electronics shut off to extend the life of what was left. Our best explanation of the Doors network being unaffected by the loss of main power is simply automated emergency procedures. The facility was designed to keep the Doors network functioning in the event of loss of main power or other emergencies. And finally, we will close this segment by discussing the previously alluded to peculiar entity found in the facility. This entity also demonstrates the extreme danger posed to people exposed to the fog in the facility over extended periods without any sort of protection. This compendium entry also further supports the immune response theory, as one person who was a non-combatant was able to avoid detection for so long.
Miho Akagi. Miho Akagi was a researcher at the facility who arrived on the island in February 1954. Born in 1929, she was only 25 years old at the time of the incident. She managed to survive for almost 6 years, hiding in rooms and dark tunnels. feeding on long preservation supplies stored in the pantries of various buildings. Due to prolonged exposure to environmental changes, her body was infected, undergoing a cruel physical evolution and endowing her with peculiar forms of defense, including telekinesis. It is possible to hear her emit an atrocious suffering scream, testifying to the fact that part of her human mind is still conscious and aware of her horrible fate.
It is noteworthy that in their own research, Miho was recorded as being infected due to the exposure to her new environment, also reinforcing the need for people to wear protective equipment in future expeditions to mitigate those risks. If she was indeed still aware of herself and conscious on a certain level, she could have been the cause of the facility lights, possibly as one last cry for help.